Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Redgate Streamed. I'm Kathi Kellenberger. I'm the editor of Simple Talk and a DevOps advocate. I'm also a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. Probably the most important thing to know about me is that I'm a lifelong learner and a teacher. I love learning new things. I love sharing what I learn with others. So that's really what I think is my mission in life. So, are you a writer? Have you written anything? So what I'd like for you to do is find the top item on this list. It's radio buttons on purpose. Find the top thing on the list that you have done. Answer that question. And I don't know if I can tell how many people are filling it in or not. Hopefully they are. So if you've written a book, choose that. If you have written an email, and that's the top thing on this list, choose that. I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds. Now I see 108 have submitted. Okay. All right, I'm going to move on. And a lot of you have written documentation. So is the highest thing on the list. And I've got a few people that have written a book. So hopefully I don't say anything wrong for those experts out there, but you can always jump in the chat and let me know if there's an issue. Now, let me see if I can see the chat. Q&A. Okay. So are you a writer? Not many people have written books, and that's kind of like the bucket list item. That's kind of the thing that people have, this bucket list, and they say, someday I'm going to write a book. So luckily, I think writing, to me, tech books is probably easier for most people. It's just, you don't have to come up with interesting scenarios. But maybe for some people, writing something like fiction would be easier. Articles are really great. That's how I got my start. And before I move on, let me just tell you a little bit about how I got started. If I go back to grade school, go back to about when I was 10 years old, I got my first money ever. I had a $10 check because I won a writing contest. Unbelievable. It was in my little town. It was probably something about something patriotic, I would bet. But that was the first money that I ever had. And I loved writing. Back when I was a child, the things I wanted to do when I grew up, I wanted to be a writer and a teacher. And I kind of feel like I've actually met that expectation. I really did do those things. When I first got started, I was working on a master's degree that I finished up in 2004, and I had to write a thesis. And after writing that thesis, I said, wow, I could write something longer than an email or something better than just documentation at work. So I contacted Steve Jones and asked him about writing for SQL Server Central. So it took me like 2 months to get that article written where I felt like it was perfect enough. And articles are never going to be perfect. Books are never going to be perfect. But it just took me that long and to turn it into him. And by the end of the year, I had about a dozen articles published out on SQL Server Central. And also I was helping with a book. I couldn't believe it. I had never set that big of a goal. I was hoping to get maybe 5 or 6 articles published in a year. One of the things about social media that's really interesting to me is that I know how to write properly. I know the difference between there, and there, and it's, and it's. The problem is on social media, I noticed that I usually type too fast, and sometimes I don't go back and look at it, and sometimes I look at it and things look right and they aren't until after I hit submit. So that's a way that something that we didn't have really 15 or 20 years ago at the rate we have now. We're all writing and getting a message out there. So one thing that should be kept in mind is that, that's part of how people see you. Email is another thing. When I started writing, I started realizing how some of my emails were not always clear. I started adding bulleted lists for things that I wanted people to really pay attention to. If I had several ideas or questions in a paragraph, they might not see them. So I have wanted to write for a lot of different things. So choose probably your top reason that you would like to write. I'll wait just a couple of minutes or a few seconds. Let's see. I've got 92 people. It doesn't look like it's going up, so let me move on. Oops, I don't see anybody answering it. Let me go back. Okay, sorry about that. I was looking at the wrong number. Number's still going up, so I'll wait. And all right, I'm going to move on. So this is a great reason. The majority, not really the majority, but more people said to give back to the community, and that is a fantastic reason. One of the big things, one of the big benefits is establishing your brand. So this is great. I actually have a slide that don't really match quite to that poll, but I think these are some interesting reasons. So establishing your brand, what is a brand? If you have little children or grandchildren like I have, if you drive around town, if you're allowed to do that right now, I know things are kind of scary, but if you drive around, the kids know logos. Two of my little grandchildren, if we go past a McDonald's, they say, "Grandma, take us to Old McDonald's." It's so cute. It's so cute. So everybody really, especially if you're out on social media, especially in SQL community, you have a brand, a reputation, how people know you. My brand is Aunt Kathi. I am that nurturing, fun aunt that loves to help people. And writing really helps establish that brand. Gets you known for a certain thing. I'm probably known for the fun aunt who will teach you about windowing functions. That's probably my brand. Another interesting thing is being an MVP, and I know it sounds kind of cheesy, a SQL celebrity. So back when I was first involved with PASS back in 2004, I watched a session by Wayne Snyder. I believe he was the president of PASS back then. And he gave a session on how to make a name for yourself. And he gave a list of things that would be helpful to become an MVP. And I sat there and said, I am going to be an MVP someday. I'm going to do those things. That was right about the same time I started writing articles. And it actually did happen a few years later. That's not really I would say the reason to write. I mean, it definitely can help with that. Another thing, and this might be a great reason, is for career opportunities. I don't think this has happened to me, but I've heard some friends say that they have gone to job interviews and they've been told, oh, we had a problem last week or last month, and when we went out and Googled it, we found an article that you wrote that helped us. So that is a really cool thing. I have had after I have gotten engagements, them tell me that, but not really during a job interview. So probably the biggest reason is to give back to the community. Think about how it was, or even today, when you have a problem or want to learn something new, you can just go out and find articles or blogs or books that people have written that can help you solve that problem. And wouldn't it be great for you to share what you know with others? And, that thing scales really well. You can teach a class in person, and I love doing that. You can teach a class, but that doesn't scale. I guess video, if you record it and share videos, they do, but having articles and books, those scale and go across the world. And you never really know how what you do impacts other people. And I truly, truly believe that. One thing and learning more. So this is a really interesting one. This is some articles, but also a Pluralsight course that I created. I was at an engagement, and it was actually a query tuning engagement. And while I was there, they said, hey, we've got this other question for you. Are you able to help us with Kerberos? And of course, I stood there like a deer in the headlights, and because I didn't really know anything about it except how to avoid it, which is, I am embarrassed to say. So I decided that I was going to create some content on Kerberos. I was going to learn it. And I spent an entire weekend trying to figure it out. I already had a little lab set up, so I didn't even spend time setting up my lab. And it just took me that long because I couldn't find one resource that told me everything I needed to know. So that's why I got started with that, just to learn more about it. And that worked out well. And I'm really thrilled because I have one of my articles out on Simple Talk about Kerberos. Some of the gurus out in the community point people to that article when they have questions. So that makes me feel really good. So don't write because you want to make money. You can make some money. I've been writing for over 15 years. I have about 11 books that I've contributed to in some way, but it really isn't a reason. We take the money that I make from royalties and publishing and just kind of stick that in our little vacation fund, go out to dinner. It's not really a reason. I have been involved. The very first book project I was involved with did have really, really great sales, and it did make money for me over several years, but that was 15 years ago, and really things have changed a lot. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. So how do you get started writing? I would suggest that if you haven't really written before, start blogging and start thinking about, problems that you've solved that maybe they could help somebody else. That's how I got started. It wasn't really blogging. It was an article, but I had a problem at work that I was trying to solve. And I said, wow, other people might have this same problem. So I'm going to write about it and see if I can help other people. Or things that you've learned. Let's say that you learned something really cool today and you want to learn more about it and start writing about it on your own. That would be a really great thing. Be sure to link back to this. We'd love that. Or things that you want to learn, such as that Kerberos delegation that I had problems with. I really knew nothing about, and now I feel pretty calm. Crazy thing is, I have never set it up in a production environment. I've helped answer questions of people. I've stood over people's shoulders. I've never done it in a production environment. But my life's kind of different now. I don't really touch real things being an editor. People have writer's block, and I'm someone that writing is now part of my job since I'm the Simple Talk editor. I've got to come up with editorials. I've got to come up with articles as well as editing other people's work. How do you do that? And I think the problem is just getting started. Once you get started, there's inertia. It's kind of like being in the zone, like with coding. Once I am, working on something, I kind of get in that zone and I don't want people to bother me. And probably the hardest thing I have is coming up with ideas. I have to write a lot of editorials. I just kind of keep a little list of ideas. And I just say, okay, I am going to work on this article this afternoon. And I just do it. Sometimes my idea, once I start writing, turns into something else completely. And that's fine. That's fine. And I would say that happens most of the time. It just goes a different direction. But I've heard some authors will say, I'm going to write, 200 words today. Doesn't matter really what it's about, but I am going to do that. So I think it's getting into the habits, getting into the zone. Now that I write so much, I would say that writer's block is not quite a problem for me. I am starting a book. I haven't signed a contract yet. I don't have the stuff in place. I do have, like, on the weekends, no place I can go. So I'm kind of stuck at the house. But, I kind of have been putting it off, but I don't have the contract yet, which is one reason. So I know that once I start in on a chapter, then everybody just leave me alone. I just want to do it. And I know things are kind of hard right now. For me, it's easy. I don't have any small kids in the house. I have a husband who's actually been going out and getting the groceries and taking care of things for me. So I'm in a really privileged position as far as being able to write. I know a lot of you are now having kids at home all day long or trying to figure out how to work from home when you never have before. And I've been working from home for years and years. So, trying to figure out if you do have extra time, when you can write. And let's see. So let's talk a bit about blogging. Blogging is really the first step for a lot of people. So there are free sites that you can set up a blog. I have my blog at WordPress.com. I don't have a WordPress server running. Simple Talk is running on WordPress, but I'm really not, an administrator as far as adding plugins or things like that. But on WordPress.com, it's very easy to use, and you can set up a free site. If you set up a free site, it's WordPress.com / whatever your site is. And I'm seeing new questions, but I still see all these questions about the previous session. Okay. What's your new book to be about? If it happens, if everything goes smoothly, it's going to be a new edition of my beginning T-SQL book. So there's 3 editions out there, and this will be the 4th edition, trying to get it up to date because the old one's about 5 or 6 years old. So getting back to blogging. So the WordPress.com / whatever you want. And I have a domain name on mine at KathySQL.com. I think it costs me less than $20 a year to do that. really, really inexpensive. And then I think there was something I got for something. Oh, the domain name was about 15, and actually to upgrade my WordPress for that was about $100. So very inexpensive, and that's for per year. SQL Server Central also has a place where you can put blogs, and there's kind of an advantage to that. There's a lot of eyes on SQL Server Central, so that is also a really great place to have a blog. If you start blogging, you make sure you start promoting your posts on social media. Make sure that you let people know that you're blogging. My poor blog is kind of like the cobbler's shoes. I used to blog a ton. I used to get a lot of hits, but since I've been working for Redgate, being an editor, I spend so much time writing, and I'm still doing books on the side. I just have neglected my poor little blog. But when I do post, they automatically send something out on Twitter. Cool thing about blogging is that you are in control. Nobody's going to tell you what you can blog, except for that last bullet point there. What you can blog, no one's going to edit it. No one's going to tech review it, except you might get comments telling you that you are incorrect or there's a better way. And in fact, that happened to me a few months ago. I came up with this really cool solution I thought was really cool for a T-SQL Tuesday session. And whenever I posted my solution, then someone commented, "Oh, there's this easier way to do that." So, I was like, "Oh no," but that's fine. I learned something new. So that was kind of cool, kind of embarrassing, kind of cool. Be sure to check with your company, and that goes for anything that you are writing that you're putting out there. You may have rules in your company. For example, if you work in healthcare or financial systems, you may have rules in your company that say things have to be cleared by a legal department, or no, you cannot write at all. Whenever I started, I first ran my articles through by my manager. That's what she wanted me to do. I worked for a law firm at the time. And after 2 or 3, she said, "Oh, you're fine. You know what you were doing." Because I was not writing them at work. I was writing them at home. I was using my own little, AdventureWorks or Northwind or whatever I was using back then. And, she was fine with it. Whenever I got my first book contract, I went back again and said, "This is what I'm wanting to do." I used to know a guy, been a long time ago, that had gotten permission at work. He was a developer, and he got permission at work, and he wrote a book. And then whenever he was time to collect his advance, and again, I'll talk about money in a minute, his company said, "Sorry, all of that money belongs to us." And the problem was, I guess in his original employment contract, it said he could not do any work on the side or anything that he did, even in his own time. If it was technical, he owed them the money. So be careful about that. Let's see. Someone is saying, Michelle, if I need a co-author, reviewer, tech editor, she's willing. And Michelle, I don't know if that is is that an offer for everyone or a question to me? I'm not really sure on here. So she's written a lot. So be sure, I don't know. I'm not sure how we contact you. We'll have to figure that out. But that is a great thing. And is there still a space to blog about SQL Server? That's a cool question. Has everything already been covered? Well, no, not everything's been covered. And the thing is, you can write about stuff that other people have written and put your own spin on it. So number one, a new version of SQL Server came out in 2019 with a ton of new things. People haven't finished writing about that. I have kind of a story about everything has been covered. So I have been speaking on windowing functions for many, many years. And one of my friends came up to me and said, why don't you write a book? Why don't you write a book about this? And I said, no, I can't do that because Itzhak Ben-Gvir wrote the book on windowing functions. I can't do that. Well, then I thought about it and I'm like, why can't I write a book on it? I'm not going to copy his book. I explain things in a different way. I have different examples. So I ended up doing it. In fact, the second edition came out last year. So, definitely right on the same topics that other people have talked about. Everything has not been covered. Absolutely not. And there's all kinds of cool things. There's new things like to do with Azure SQL database. There's so much all the time that's new. So let's talk a little bit about articles. That's kind of the next step up. Often articles are reviewed. Somebody is going to vet that the code works correctly. Not always. Here are, 4 places I know of to publish articles. At least for Simple Talk, I make sure that those articles are technically correct. And I work on the grammar, that type of thing, and get the article in a polished state. I know in SQL Server Central, Steve also edits there. I'm not sure about MS SQL Tips or Database Journal, but you have less control if it's an article. Sometimes you get paid. If you write for Simple Talk and we publish your article, we pay you. Writing articles is easier than writing a book. Okay, so writing a book, there's other people in charge. And actually, I think that writing articles, you can actually make more money writing articles than books, just because books pay so little nowadays. One thing I do once in a while, I'll go to a SQL Saturday and see a fantastic presentation. Last year, more so than this year. And I'll go up to the speaker later and say, hey, I think this would be a great article. Would you write an article about this? So that's not plagiarism. That's the same person, but it's just, turning something into an article. And it might lead to a book. Also, blogging could lead to books as well. The way I got involved with my first book is, as I mentioned, I was writing articles for SQL Server Central. I had an article about DTS. Remember DTS? That was back in 2004. Brian Knight saw that article. He was trying to put people together to write an SSIS book. And I had been to a concert. I came home. There was an email from Brian Knight. And he said, I'm not sure how he even got my email address, probably from Steve. He said, will you write a chapter for my new book? I was floored. I couldn't believe it. It was like your favorite band emailing you and asking if you would help them write a song. Unbelievable. Thanks, Brian, if you're out there listening. It was the biggest opportunity of my entire life. Just so amazing. My life has never been the same. In fact, the day before that, or maybe even that day, I was learning to play guitar, and I have never picked up the guitar again. That was 2004. I feel sad about that, but my life has completely turned around. It's just so different. So how do you get involved with book projects if that's what you want to do? Start with the articles and blogs first. I think there's got to be some content out there that people see, that people can vet a bit to make sure that you really can write. Networking is a great way. I was at a SQL Saturday a few years ago. I was working on my first windowing function book. I ran into this guy named Clayton. I knew him from the community. And he said, what are you working on? I'm working on this book on windowing functions. He started telling me a story about how he had a customer that didn't want to use analysis services, and he managed to use windowing functions to come up with all the same functionality without, using cubes. And I was floored. I said, please write a chapter for my book. And he did. And the same thing happened when I was working on the second edition. I was at Albany SQL Saturday and ran into Ed, and he started telling me how he had a presentation about using baseball data going back like over 100 years and using windowing functions to analyze them. So I had him join in on my book this time. So just networking with authors at things like SQL Saturday, Past Summit, Twitter, might get you involved with a book. I had no plans originally to bring those guys in, but I'm sure glad that I did. It's probably easier to start with 1 or 2 chapters instead of being the main author but it can happen. I do know some people whose first book, they were the main author or the lead author or the only author. That can happen. It's a big thing to bite off. It's a big thing to try to accomplish. If you're involved with a book, there are deadlines that you have to meet. I have a deadline today. I was supposed to get my first chapter in, but I don't have a contract yet, so that's not happening. But there are deadlines, and you have to stay with them. When I wrote my beginning T-SQL book, I wrote 3 chapters, turned them in well ahead of the deadline, but then they didn't like my chapters and gave me advice. I started rewriting the chapters, and then they came back and said, hey, you missed your deadline. I'm like, well, I didn't really miss the deadline. He told me to redo everything. And then they're like, we want to bring in some extra authors. No, I can do this. So I convinced them that I could do it. But it was, being a brand new author for them, they were more sticklers on the deadlines. I think now that I've written quite a few books for them, they are fine with, letting me have some more leeway. If you write a book, you have less control. I think you get more control as you get more experience, or they get more experience with you. Because I definitely had less control on that first book. Now I have quite a bit more control, but they still are. They are still controlling quite a bit of things. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it really is a bucket list item. It was never a bucket list item for me. Originally, I was thrilled to be writing articles, and then it just kind of happened. I started with that first book in 2005 on integration services, and then ended up writing several. And I just never had a dream like that, except maybe when I was, 8 or 9 years old is when, and really I let those writing dreams die in high school and college. I really did, just because, I don't know, just not great experiences. But I'm pretty thrilled, pretty happy about it. One funny thing, my mother, I don't think she's got it now, but when I had my first 2 books come out, she had them sitting in gallon plastic bags. It was so funny. So they wouldn't get dirty. Next to the family Bible. It was so funny. I think she took those away for now because it's kind of old news that I'm writing books, but I thought that was pretty cool. Money. Okay. So I've alluded to money. You will not make a lot of money writing books. Back in 2005, that very first book that I worked with, they were paying quite a bit. And for that whole book, and the authors got to divide up quite a bit, plus we got royalties. And the latest book, of course, is much smaller. Very, very small amount I'll get, probably about $800. Not a lot. Let me kind of break it down how this works. when you have a book contract with someone like A Press or Rocks, the way it works is that you, I'm going to scroll down to look at the slide previews. A minute. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong thing. The way it works is that they will come up with an amount like $1,000 or whatever it is, and say that's your advance. When you get the book done, they give you that amount. And it's an advance on kind of like your allowance when you're a little kid. Whenever you get an allowance as a little kid, let's say you get 2 weeks advance. Then when those weeks come up, you don't get any allowance until you catch up, okay? Royalties work pretty much the same way. There's a very small percentage that you can actually get. And what they do is they sell books. They also have an online subscription service that you actually benefit from that as well. But those royalties that you would be getting chip away at that advance, and it could take several years. My first book with A Press was 2008 or 2009, I think. And I believe it finally broke even back then. But I got an $8,000 advance on that book. They're not paying that kind of money anymore. So my more recent books are actually meeting the advance much more quickly, in about 2 years. But the good thing is, if you don't make the advance, that's okay. You don't have to pay it back. That's not a problem. So another thing you can do is self-publish. If you go with a publisher, they are in charge. They have some advantages, like a project manager in charge is somebody that keeps things going that you can go to with problems. They have editors, and I've been a tech reviewer for a bunch of books for both. I used to do some for Wiley Rocks, and now I do about one a year for A Press. They have artists. For example, I am not an artist at all. I'm really bad at things like that. So sometimes I'll have a diagram or something, and it gets the point across, but it's not that beautiful. So they'll redo it for me. They do things like formatting. They take these Word documents and turn them into something beautiful. When you finally see, you get one final shot before it goes to publish, you get back these PDF documents that look how the book's going to look. They are beautiful. It's thrilling. They also take care of marketing and publicity, and they do things like, ads, Google ads, things like that, specifically for your book, and that's pretty cool. You could probably do the same kind of things. They do the printing. They create ebooks like Kindle, PDF. They also have, at least with A Press, they've got this online subscription so people can go and read the books that way as well. And of course, I mentioned you get that royalty advance. If you are self-publishing, which that is an option, you are in charge of everything. But you also have to figure everything out. You may need some cash up front. You may have to pay some people. Maybe you've got a friend who will tech review for you. Or maybe you'll have to pay some people. Maybe you'll need to pay a copy editor. Maybe maybe you might have to hire an artist for some things. There are some self-publishing companies that can help you. I have not really had experience with that, so I don't have any recommendations. But you might make more money. And I do have an interesting example to show you. Oh, here's how a thing you can do with Amazon, this Kindle Direct Publishing. I have not done it, but I do have a friend who's done it, Jason Straight. And what Jason did, it was pretty easy. He wrote a series called 31 Days of SSIS. And what he ended up doing is taking all of those posts, putting it in the format he needed to do, and publishing it. And it's not anything more than these blog posts. What he did do is go to the comment section of each blog and kind of use that as his tech review. And I can't see in this graphic exactly what year he did this, 2000 something. So it's kind of old, but he sells this for $3, and he's made, I don't know, maybe, I can't remember exactly how much money he's made, but maybe $4,000 or $5,000 over the years. It's pretty crazy. So that's an option. And I wanted to, the slides are not looking exactly how I thought. So I'm going to bring up, I tried to avoid demos and just do slides, but it looks like my slides are not exactly how I expected them to be. So I'm going to look at something. I'm going to have to bring up a document. Let's see if I can find it. Build your brand. Okay. Just wanted to, before I get to the next section, bring up a document that I'm going to share. All right. So what are some tips and tools that you can use? I use Grammarly, especially in my job. You can use Grammarly for free. I have the paid subscription because I want the extra features. And Grammarly will give you suggestions, correct your grammar, and actually it's saved me quite a few times. I won't go into exactly the word, but I had an article that had the word public in it. Was supposed to have the word public in it. It wasn't one I wrote. It was one I was getting ready to publish. The author, amazing author, he didn't notice it. It's one of those things where your brain kind of shows you what you need to see. Grammarly highlighted the word and said, that doesn't seem like this goes here. I was like, oh my gosh. So I corrected it. It was that way like 3 or 4 places in the document. Shared a laugh with the author, but luckily it never got published with the wrong word. Grammarly is, you got to be careful. You can't accept every change because it will do goofy things like, let's say you're talking about a particular function. After you use the word function 3 or 4 times, it'll tell you to start using other words instead of the word function that don't mean anything, close. So it's kind of weird. There are some settings you can tweak. I don't know if I'm not tweaking them correctly. If it goes into code samples, it's really kind of odd because it will just pick a random word in a code sample and tell you that it's spelled wrong when theoretically, it should probably give you errors on the entire code sample. Luckily, it doesn't. And so what I do is I just kind of, dismiss the ones I don't care about. But it does help. I would say avoid choppy short sentences. And that's one thing that Grammarly does help with. Let's say you've got a paragraph, and every paragraph or every sentence in that, none of them have any commas or any compound, sentences. It's just boring. On the other hand, avoid long run-on sentences. sentences that just go on and on and on. Often those can be broken down into multiple sentences that make more sense. And what I've noticed, people have the tendency of doing something like, when you're working with SQL Server, do this, adding these extra little, I guess you would call it phrases on the front. I'm not an English major at all. So I'm, doing the best I can with being an editor. I think I'm doing okay. But, often I can just rearrange a sentence and make it feel better. One thing I really suggest is when you write, don't publish right away, especially like a blog. Don't publish it right away or don't turn it in right away. Wait a couple of days, then go back and reread it with new eyes. It will feel like somebody else wrote it. At least it does for me. I feel like somebody else wrote it. Mistakes will pop out. I've also noticed if I put it in different ways, move it, if I'm working in a small monitor, move it to a big monitor, print it out. I've noticed that if I look at something different ways, sometimes things will pop out. If you have a colleague or a family member who can take a look at what you've written, sometimes that helps. Even if you're stuck at home and maybe your spouse or your teenage child stuck at home with you, maybe they can help you, with the wording, the grammar, even if not the technical stuff. I took a creative writing class in college. I made a C in the class. As I said, high school and college killed my desire for writing. And the main thing that I learned from that class is to avoid using the same word multiple times in a sentence. That rule has stayed with me forever. Avoid switching voice and tense. So I'll show you an example, a writing example in just a minute, but which has one of those mistakes in it. But be careful with that. Also, articles and books are more formal than presentations or blog posts. So if you're writing a blog post that's very informal, a presentation is informal. It's like having a conversation. Articles and books really need to be a little more better on the quality as far as here we go. So let me show you. Got a little demo. Got to have a demo. And hopefully you can see. I can't tell what you're looking at. Hopefully it came up. So what I would like for you to do is, once you can see this writing sample, put a note in the chat, or the Q&A, I guess. Put a note in the Q&A of a thing that you would change about this. Just real quick. And actually, the time is getting low, so I think I'm just going to go for it. The first thing about this is that the title isn't really what the article's about, so be careful about that. The first sentence, I'm simply going to tell you a simple way. I see that all the time in articles that I get. Be careful about repeating the words, even though it's not the exact same word. Let's see. When I create database tables by writing scripts and you run those in SSMS, we get a message stating that the table was created and you see an error. Notice that I'm switching back between I and we and you. I'm pretty particular about articles in Simple Talk. I get rid of that. I change the article so that it's the author talking to the reader. I get rid of things like that. In regards to creating tables with widgets 5, we can create tables right in write in the SXNDKS, and I can see the table when the creation process actually finished, just like I have always dreamed a creation project. So you can see that's a run-on sentence, not specifying what a word means, what an abbreviation means, not abbreviations, forgetting the word now, things like that. A picture that you're not really talking about. Circling what you want them to pay attention to with an ugly, squiggly line. I could go on for 10 minutes, but I'm not going to go forever. So that second paragraph is one that's got the choppy sentences. No, not even a comma in any of those sentences. That's very tedious. So you can kind of see, I don't know if anyone put any other thing. I'm not seeing anything else in the chat. So you can see this is not unusual. I get articles that are wonderful technically, but then, I have to work with the author, and that's fine. That's my job. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so I have an offer for you. Did I stop sharing? Yeah. I have an offer for you. If you have been writing blogs, articles, and you are interested and have an idea about a book, you contact me. I would love to make an introduction to A-Press. I have done that a couple of times, and people have gone on to written books. Maybe you'd like to write for Simple Talk. If you would like to write for Simple Talk or even SQL Server Central, I can hook you up there too. Email me. We are always looking for authors. I cannot guarantee that you will be published. Oops, did I not stop sharing? Okay. Sorry about that. I thought when I clicked the slide, it actually stopped sharing, but now I see that it didn't. Okay, so now you can see the share, see it, and see my email address. So if you were interested in writing a book or writing for Simple Talk or SQL Server Central, reach out to me. I want people that have some experience. It might just be blogging or writing articles somewhere else.